Hey, everybody. What I wanted to talk about today is going back to the Ouroboros again for just a minute. And we've only talked about it as meaning one thing in the past, which is kind of like the Gnostics described, how we are kind of, they viewed it as being trapped within the material world and we're trying to escape it. But that's not necessarily the way we view it in alchemy. That's a very dualistic way of looking at it. There's another way of looking at it, just as there is also another way of looking at and understanding the Ouroboros. And when you look at it this way, the answer is contained within the problem also. I'll get to what I mean by that in just a second. When I was writing this, there's a phrase you'll hear in alchemy sometimes called "the end is hidden in the beginning." It's one of those famous alchemical phrases. That's another thing that the Ouroboros can mean. You know, the Ouroboros is a dragon biting its own tail. Its tail is in its mouth. So literally, it is literally the end within the beginning. So that's one of the symbols of it. But what does that mean? So we all begin our journey and the alchemical process in the physical world, in the material world, not just in the body, but of the body. What I mean by that is like how when we first come into the world, when we first really start to wake up to ourselves, you know, as kids and sort of coming online, so to speak, we believe what our senses tell us. You know, the world appears solid, time appears linear, reality seems to be whatever we can touch, taste, see, and survive. And so we live from the outside in. We respond to things like hunger, we avoid pain, we chase comfort. We become conditioned to think of the physical world, as the only world. If something can't be measured or proven or pointed to, it doesn't feel real. But then, as we get a little bit older and we start to have more life experiences, questions start to creep in. And you've had these questions. We've all had these questions. These questions are the reason that we're on the spiritual path, so to speak, right now. They usually come in the dark when the distractions go quiet and something deeper rises. And what I mean by questions, it's things like, is there a God? What happens when I die? What's the point of all this? These aren't intellectual questions. They're almost like wounds. They're aches. They burn holes in the map of who we thought we were. And that ache is sacred. The reason it's sacred is because it's the friction that generates the spark. It's the pain that forces us to start digging, that forces us to start following this path. For many of us, this is where the great work begins, with those questions. We don't usually call it that at first, the great work. At the start, it's just seeking. And we do it by reading books and, then we start lighting candles and trying to do rituals and watching the stars, getting into astrology, whispering prayers that we barely even understand. We're reaching towards something that we can't quite yet name. We know we want something more than the physical world, but we can't even really say what it is yet. We just know that there is a hole in us, a wound in us, and we want to fill it in some way. But what we're really doing underneath it all is this is the very beginning of the alchemical process. So back in the old days, like when there were more alchemists in the world, what they call this part is the opus minor, or the lesser work. And everything that we do in the Golden Dawn system of magic, all of the rituals, the elemental work, the planetary work, the zodiacal work, all of this falls into the category of the opus minor, or the lesser work. It's where we start to refine and reassemble the fragmented pieces of the self. We work with the four elements: earth, which is our body; water, which is our emotions; air, which is our intellect; and fire, which is our will. We begin to observe ourselves, to discipline our attention, to face the shadow and harness the light. We're doing all of that in the lesser work. And it's slow at first. Sometimes it even gets boring and monotonous. Sometimes it gets painful. But if we keep persisting, something begins to shift. Rituals become doorways. Symbols come alive. We begin to see. The veil starts to thin, so to speak, and we start having experiences that can't really be explained by physical means. Sometimes dreams may turn prophetic, or synchronicity start multiplying. We start to feel watched or guided, not in like a paranoid way, but in a way that makes us feel like we've stumbled onto something that's ancient and sacred. That's exactly how I felt. Something we were always meant to find. Then we begin this ascent. We reach higher states of consciousness. We touch the edge of ecstasy in meditations. We have visions, out of body experiences, encounters with spiritual beings. And y'all have heard me talk about all of this stuff through the years. We start to taste what the mystics tried to describe in poems. We rise up the tree of life. We connect to the divine in ways that no doctrine could have prepared us for. We feel weightless, endless, and luminous. We become light. And it is an incredibly beautiful, very, very real, and very, very necessary experience. But then, after going through all of those things that would seem miraculous to the average person, just as suddenly we get spit back out and we're back in the body, back in the kitchen, back in traffic, back in pain. And if we don't understand what's happening, it can feel like failure, like we fail. Like we'll start to think about things like the Garden of Eden in the fall, and it'll feel like we went through that fall again. Like what we lost, or like we lost what we found, is what it is. I've heard people describe it to me that way before. But the thing is, we don't really fall. We descended. This is one of the secret truths of the great work. It doesn't end in heaven. It ends here, in the place that we started by trying to leave behind. This is what the ancient alchemists were pointing to when they drew the Ouroboros, the dragon devouring its own tail. It's one of the oldest symbols in alchemy and one of the most misunderstood. People see it as a symbol of eternity or of cycles, but it's more than that. We've talked about it being more than that in the past. The Ouroboros represents the deepest mystery of transformation, that the end is hidden in the beginning. That after climbing to the very top of the mountain, you find the same earth you started on, but now it's different. Now it's sacred. Now it's whole. In Kabbalah, they say the same thing. This truth is mapped into the tree of life. They say that there's a current of energy that flows upward from Malkuth, which is the physical world, towards Kether, which is the divine source. This is the path of ascent, of purification, awakening, returning to the divine. But there's also a second current flowing from Kether back down to Malkuth. This is the descent, the return. The tree is not a ladder, it's a circle, a dragon biting its own tail. You ascend to the heights of heaven only to find yourself grounded once again in the present moment. In the taste of coffee, the sound of the wind, the ache in your back. But now you see it differently. You experience it differently because you are different. Presence is the mind of God. Being here. This is the very center of the mind of God. This is the final secret that almost nobody talks about. That the point of the great work is not to escape the world, but to become fully embodied in it. Not to transcend form, the material plane, but to consecrate it. You start out by wanting to escape the body because it feels like limitation. But once you've ascended and come back, you realize the body was never a prison. It's the temple. The thing that looked like clay was actually the gold, but we didn't have the eyes to see it at first. When you're truly present, when you feel the weight of your body on the chair you're sitting in, the temperature of the room, the air in your lungs, the textures of things against your skin, you're no longer divided. You aren't lost in thought anymore. You're not naming and judging everything. You're simply experiencing. You simply are. And in that state, That's when all opposites dissolve. There's no longer a self and an other, a self and a not self. No light or dark, no masculine or feminine, no sacred or profane. There's just this right here, right now. And this is everything. Thinking is what creates separation. But experience, embodied presence, that's what dissolves it. This is why the end of the work looks so much like the beginning, but feels entirely different. Before, when you were grounded in the body, you were asleep, but now you're awake. Before, the material world seemed hollow. Now, it's radiant. Before, you thought God was somewhere else. Now, you know God is in every single breath going in and out of your body. The philosopher's stone that we start off seeking in alchemy, it's not like a glowing gem somewhere. It's the ability to see clearly, to be fully and completely here. Enlightenment doesn't mean you float above the world somewhere. It's walking through the world with your eyes open, your heart unguarded, and your spirit rooted in the real, in here. You still do the dishes. You still got to pay the bills. But now you do them as prayers. Now they are sacred acts. This is the alchemical union of opposites, not through mental gymnastics or philosophical speculation, but through direct, embodied experience. When you enter the moment fully, there's no longer a split between heaven and earth. You realize that there never was, that division only existed in your own mind, in your own head. Presence, embodied presence, being here, is what collapses that illusion. It bridges the eternal and the ordinary. It's what fulfills the great work. And so we return full circle, the dragon devouring its own tail. And we see, maybe for the very first time, that the treasure we spent our whole lives seeking was buried exactly under the spot where we started, where we began our journey. And that is another meaning of the Ouroboros, something for you to meditate on every time you see that the end is in the beginning. And I want to end the way I usually try to, which is by saying thank you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your presence in my life. It's not something that I take for granted. I appreciate it very, very much. And I will talk to you back here soon. Have a good day.